Great. Hello and welcome back to Raw 12:51 a.m.'s coverage of the Warwick SU Spring Elections. Throughout the week, we're going to be releasing interviews of all the candidates that are running for positions in the SU. And today we are here with Anna Taylor, who is looking to become your next SU president for 2023 and 2024. We'll just be asking her a few questions today. So start off, Anna. What are your key priorities if you were to be elected?
Sure. So I have a number. The first one being to build a more transparent, efficient and effective SU. Unfortunately, at the minute, there's a lot of kind of processes that aren't the most efficient running. So I want to build them up to be a little bit more efficient so that we can deliver a better service to our members. But also focus on things like the cost of living. We know it's hitting hard at the minute. And we need to be looking at how we can expand kind of efforts around the cost of living into both the union work internally, so making our sports and societies more accessible and financially accessible and affordable, but also in how we're pressuring the university to make sure that learning is still flexible and accessible to our students, and with that sometimes having to navigate part-time jobs, for example, to kind of stay afloat at the minute.
Yeah, and what makes you stand out from the other presidential candidates that are going for the role?
So one thing I'm really proud of having kind of achieved this year is bringing particularly the student activities area, where I've been working most closely, kind of back from a really messy kind of situation after COVID, where a lot of things weren't working properly, and it's been kind of a case of, if the job isn't being done effectively, I've just stepped in and done it myself. And I think that operational perspective is something that's really important, and actually a really valuable perspective to have in going into a leadership position like president. Having done the work myself, I know how the processes work, and therefore know how they can be changed and improved to become better, to become more effective. But also I know that I have the trust of the staff to know that I will do a good job, and I will work hard on behalf of the students and stick to those principles that I've been showing in just delivering the best service that I absolutely can, as I've done this year so far.
Yeah, and obviously Warwick students, there are a number of issues that have been going on and off campus over the last year. So what is the biggest issue facing Warwick students right now, and how do you plan to tackle it?
So I've mentioned already the cost of living, but it's a massive concern for everyone right now, but particularly students, because money is tight. And there's a number of strands that we need to focus on in how we kind of tackle the cost of living crisis and make sure that our students are provided for. At the SU level, we need to make sure that the services we are offering are affordable. So whether that be bringing down the cost of socks and sports so that student experience is still enriching and accessible, or looking at our pricing in our outlets and making sure that we're freezing prices, so that there is at least something that is always affordable in our outlets, and also understanding that what is affordable is a shifting and kind of changing definition at the minute. But then also at the university level, looking where there's money and where there can be physical financial investment that goes straight into the pockets of students, and encouraging the university to find those areas as much as possible. But then also the larger national scale of can we be exerting influence to bring up those maintenance loan thresholds in line with inflation, so students aren't being left behind.
Yeah, and what more do you think needs to be done to support victims of sexual assault on and off campus, and what extra support do you think should be provided?
Okay, so I think this is again a kind of a two-pronged conversation. So prevention, I think, is the first part of this. We need to look at where students are coming into contact with each other, and actually where a lot of the kind of incidents of sexual assault are happening. It tends to be people that know each other. It tends to be people that are in friend groups and social circles, in the same club or society or the same residence. It's people that tend to be close to each other a lot of the time. And so it's how do we target those areas and make sure that we're educating our community first and foremost to prevent sexual assault. I've been working a lot this year with Report and Support in bringing back welfare training for society and club execs, and trying to embed some of that preventative education in the training to prevent situations happening where somebody does assault somebody. But also then there's the response side of things. We know that there's an element of distrust with a lot of our services on campus that are available to support in instances of sexual assault. So it's about kind of encouraging people to trust those services, but more importantly, proving why those services should be trusted and holding them to account if they're not trustworthy. And I think that in the campus context, that's really important. But then also that means that the education around that can kind of be taken off campus as well. We need to be expanding the work that's already being done on the Good Night Out campaign, making sure that the clubs, particularly Casbah, that aren't working with us to actually educate their staff and make sure that it's an inclusive and safe space to go and have a night out. We need to make sure that we're building those relationships more firmly, and making sure that the staff in those areas are in line with our values to make sure that our students are having a safe environment to go and have a night out.
Yeah, and to go along with that, how would you continue to deal with any instances of spiking both on and off campus as well?
Okay, I think the important point with this is understanding that the onus shouldn't be on students to not get spiked, or whoever is in our venues to not get spiked, but in understanding that it has to be an educating staff piece on how to better protect our students when they're in our venues, and then also extending that work to venues off of campus as well. It is an education piece there of making sure that our staff on the bar are looking for instances of spiking, looking at the kind of trajectory of from the tap to the cup to the hand to the mouth, where is that opportunity for spiking, and making sure that as the sober, responsible kind of staff in the room who are running an event, that we are creating that safe environment. So I think it's about making sure that our staff are trained to properly kind of prevent, but then also have a clear line of escalation and how we respond to instances of spiking, so that people know that if something does happen and you're in one of our venues, that you can escalate it and it'll be taken seriously and investigated properly.
Yeah, and obviously, as president, you'd be sort of running the SU. So how would you help create a more inclusive and accessible SU, especially for students from marginalised groups and lower income backgrounds as well?
Sure. So I think, well, we know from surveys recently that particularly disabled students don't tend to feel a sense of community and kind of belonging at Warwick in the same way as non-disabled students do. We know from an SU perspective, we don't get as high engagement from Black students as from students of other ethnicities. So I think it's about looking at those areas where we know we're not engaging people and we know we don't have that student voice from our marginalised communities on campus. And then identifying how we can elevate those voices and make sure that we're really responding to feedback about whether they feel a part of a community or not. I really want to work on our association structures. Currently they're non-functioning. We don't have a clear kind of feedback loop and an opportunity for voice outside of our PTOs from marginalised communities that's ingrained in the SU structure. And I think it's really important that we look at the amazing groups on campus who are already doing fantastic community advocacy campaigning work on behalf of these marginalised communities, be it kind of our societies who work to create that community and a touch point for students to go and feel like they belong, and elevate those rather than asking our students to come and duplicate their own work for the sake of it being ingrained in the SU structure. So I think it's about elevating the spaces where that work is already happening and supporting our members who are already doing fantastic work.
Yeah, and obviously the SU also interacts with the wider student union body in the country. So how would you handle the relationship between the SU and the National Union for Students, especially following the all-student vote we saw a few weeks ago to disassociate from the NUS?
Sure. So I'm confident it can be a productive relationship still. It's worth noting that we're disaffiliating from NUS UK, which is the political arm, and we're going to have to navigate not having that vote and the kind of way that we still exert our voice as a union on a national level. I think there's a number of ways to do that, particularly kind of building relationships and strong connections with sitting sabbatical officers, but also the kind of more long-standing staff teams at other unions as well, so that we can be part of that larger voice in a really kind of holistic way, particularly through spaces like, I know the Russell Group at the minute are starting to unions in the Russell Group, we're talking to each other a lot more than has been previously, so there's still ways that we can really exert that voice on a national level, but also maintain that kind of good dialogue with NUS. I know the NUS charity are a fantastic resource in terms of networking with other unions, but also just in terms of resources for how we maintain our democracy. So I'm looking forward to maintaining a good relationship and a good dialogue with them as we move away from our affiliation with NUS UK.
Yeah. Students obviously have a number of other issues, and one of them has been transport over the last year. So how would you seek to improve transport options for students, especially those living on campus in both Coventry, in Canley and in Leamington Spa as well?
Sure. So, I mean, it's not a secret, and it has never been a secret, that there will be an increased demand for buses at peak times of the day, because students are coming onto and off of campus, and they are doing it in droves. It is frustrating that year on year there's promises made to kind of improve the bus services, and it never really seems to happen. I think there's a point at which we just have to take a firm line with Stagecoach and say, if you're not going to deliver increased bus services in peak times and accurate tracking of your buses, so that we're not standing in the rain waiting for an hour for a bus that's not coming, then maybe the union will have to rethink advertising or kind of advocating for your services to our members, because they're worth better than that. So I think that's essentially the approach that has to be taken now. Is enough is enough. We demand better, or we'll go elsewhere.
Yeah, and to go along with that, how would you continue to help achieve net zero on campus?
Sure. So I think a big part of this is recognizing that the university campus particularly is a changing place, and it's growing. And I think the most sustainable thing that we can do is demand that the university has all of their buildings and their new buildings that they're developing be net zero, both in the way that they plan them, the way that they construct them, and then also the way that they're run from that point onwards. The university is going in the right direction. I think it's just about maintaining that pressure and maintaining that kind of voice that this is a priority for students and needs to be an immediate priority. And then as well, in our own respect as a union, looking at how we can be more sustainable and how we can contribute to the kind of offsetting of the carbon footprint on campus. So I know there's a lot of work already ongoing with looking and reviewing at how we can be more sustainable in our outlets, which is really productive, but we need to keep the momentum with that, because otherwise it's not going to get anywhere nearly in time. Yeah,
and the final few questions obviously all around how the SU is the body that brings students closer to the main administration on campus as well. What do you think the relationship between the SU and the university should look like?
Collaborative first and foremost. There will be many areas where we all agree, and we are going to have to work together, and it's a brilliant thing to work together. It will be really productive to work together to the same goals, but ultimately with a respect for the fact that we are two independent organisations. We are the students' union, we answer directly to the students, and so we have to kind of represent the students' interests first and foremost, and sometimes that's going to bring us into conflict with the university. I think the trick is to disagree agreeably, respect that sometimes there will be areas that we disagree on, be firm when we know that we have to be firm, and that we know that we're standing in the right and that we're representing what the students are asking for, but then also working to collaborate as much as possible where we can, so that we have some form of kind of leverage when we need to have those harder discussions.
Yeah, and how would you support students in mitigating the impact of strike action, both strike action that has taken place and potential strike action in the future as well?
So we know that our students have voted to support the strikes. So ultimately, the best way that we can support students who are trying to navigate strike action is to push the university to meet the demands of the striking lecturers and striking staff members, so that there is no need to strike. So first and foremost, that's the kind of most effective approach. But then with the acknowledgement that if the university does not meet those demands, we're going to have to make sure that students are still kind of taken care of. And I think the main kind of areas that we'll have to focus on are pressuring departments so that if you miss a week of learning because of a strike, you're not going to be kind of assessed on that learning. Content is not assessed if you are not taught the content. We just need to make sure that the responses are fair and proportionate.
Yeah, and in the light of the last few years of strikes and COVID disruption as well, how would you support students if they did choose to try and pursue compensation for the disruption to their learning?
So I think it ultimately comes back to that. How would you support students? Ultimately, that is the purpose of the Students' Union. If it comes down to a student is asking for compensation, it is our job to stand up on their behalf and say, this is what our students want and this is what we're going to fight for. I know there's larger movements with petitions kind of outside of just the workspace to try and gain kind of compensation on behalf of students in their missed learning. So ultimately it's for us to stand up and kind of fight for that on their behalf.
Great. Yeah, that has been all our questions. Thank you to Anna for agreeing to the interview. Make sure to check out all of the other interviews that we will be uploading onto the channel and making sure that we inform you about who you should be voting for your next student union body.